This is the Sunday stream opening song because the other song is copyrighted. La 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 la. Oh look, here comes Dog Cat Fox.
Hi, Sky.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Sunday stream. The stream I do on Sundays because Sunday is the day to stream. On Sundays. Hope you're all doing well this morning. Hope you all had a good week. And maybe that good week is about to end. I don't know. I guess we'll find out when we listen to our speakers speak. But before we get into all that, who is joining me on this beautiful Sunday morning? Good morning, Sunday morning. Matt Barnes, Reject, Lurking Gopher, Evil One, Keeverdam, The Magister, Mike R., Burgid, Chapter Master Azrael. Chapter Master? Is that like the Page Master? That Macaulay Culkin movie from way back when? I don't know. Let's see. Decode, Noah Asensio, Old Guy Gamer, Absolutely Degenerate. Jake. Okay, I'm going to try to pronounce my words this morning. Apparently my mouth has not woken up yet, even though my brain still kind of has. Jake Tungseth. Mike Savage, No Name, Non-Vitae Rex, Swirl Blue, The Best Remy. Good morning to you all. So, what are we doing today? Well, if you did not know, and honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if you didn't, a couple of days ago, the state of Mississippi passed legislation to ban the use of critical race theory in schools. And this has caused quite some controversy. And since I haven't done a show relatively recently focusing on the subject, I thought it might be useful to get a refresher course on what critical race theory is and why it is under attack, at least according to the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute. Now, veteran viewers of my channel may recall that some time ago now, it must be several months at this point, I did a series called CRT, or critical race theory, let me try that again. It was 2010, a critical race theory odyssey, because I found a panel discussion from 2010, long before the current hubbub over the subject became prominent, talking about critical race theory in Oregon State University, I think it was. And aside from my continual embarrassment that I thought I knew the pronunciation of W.E.B. Du Bois's name when I didn't, and I still am chagrined by that, but hey, what are you going to do? We learned quite a bit about the unfiltered notions of what critical race theory was back then, and as well, that it is taught in schools. As much as we are told elsewise now, critical race theory isn't taught in schools. It is taught in schools, and derivatives thereof have been taught in K through 12 for many years now. So there's a lot of contradicting thoughts on, you shouldn't ban critical race theory. It's not even taught in schools. Then why are you afraid of it being banned, right? Anyway, that's all what we'll probably get into with this. So this video, again, comes from the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute. It is a Zoom call / panel discussion kind of thing. I think it may be edited. I'm not quite sure, but it was a live stream, or it was live streamed, I should say, and comes in at just under 16 minutes. So let's find out and let's compare and contrast what is said about critical race theory and why it is under attack. Maybe we'll learn something. I'm going to start off with a few seconds for sound test. You guys tell me if you can hear it, and then we will proceed.
Greetings and welcome to the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute.
Okay, you guys hear that? Now I promise you, I boosted the sound. If you think it sounds a little quiet here, you should have heard it when I first found it. So I did boost the sound as much as I possibly could. Can you at least hear it? I'll try to be quiet on my end. Evil One says sounds good. Keeverdam says sounds good. Okay, so I think it does pick up in pitch a little bit as we go. Yeah, but this is the sound after having been boosted. All right.
My name is Charles Woods, and I'm the Education Director and Trainer here at the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute. And today we have a kind of a different discussion, but we have an informational talk about CRT with a college perspective. And so we're going to go ahead and get started. First of all, the opinions expressed as part of the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute presentations are solely those of our panelists.
Yes. I give you all disclaimers to what you're about to say. Okay. All right. So this is from the college perspective. All right. Now, see, that has often been one of the arguments regarding CRT, that it is something that is used at a high level educational sort of sociological theory thing. It's not used in curriculums for K through 12 students. It's too high above that grade level and mindset. Is it though?
So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our co-panelists today. We have Abigail and Afia.
Okay.
And I want you all to go ahead and introduce yourselves and tell us just a little bit about yourselves before we get started. Abigail, we'll go ahead and start with you.
So much. So my name is Abigail Romero. I'm a current junior at Harvard College studying applied math and economics.
Okay, so we have a junior at Harvard College, applied mathematics. Okay.
I yield from Long Island, New York, spent some time in Atlanta, Georgia this past break. And I'm incredibly excited to be speaking to all of you today on CRT.
Okay. I guess my first question would be, what qualifies you to talk about CRT if you're a junior, you haven't even graduated college yet? But okay.
Thank you. Afia?
Hi, everyone. My name is Afia Rahman. I am a current sophomore at Harvard College.
A sophomore and a junior at Harvard College. Okay, maybe I'll be surprised. I'm still confused as to what either of our guests have to say about critical race theory.
Studying social studies, and I'm from Syracuse, New York, and I'm truly honored to be here and have this discussion.
Okay.
So I want to thank you all so much for being here. I also want to thank our civil rights fellow, John Paul, for helping establish this program. And so we're going to go ahead and get started. Question one, can you all begin by providing an introduction to what exactly is critical race theory?
Okay, just for my own addition here, I'll give my baseline high-level view of what critical race theory is, or what it says. And this is my understanding of it. It's like I say, bit short and sweet, but this is it. Racism pervades every aspect of life, no matter what. And critical race theory is there to examine how racism affects any particular subject that you bring up. That's the high level of it. That's my understanding of it. Now, I could be 100% wrong, and I'm happy to be shown that I'm wrong. But after listening to so many speakers over time, that is the through line to most of it. You assume the existence of racism in all people and in all things in some way, shape, or form. Racism is the original sin in all things. It cannot be washed away. It cannot be denied. Everyone possesses it to some extent or another, although some do more so than others, usually based on demographic position. And critical race theory is there to show the secret connections between racism and all eventualities in life, systems, and history. There you go. That's my understanding. Bit of a cynical one. I could be wrong, but I guess we'll find out. Thank you, Matt Barnes. Have you learned nothing from Greta Thunberg and Hollywood? The children are way smarter, Scribe. Yes, no. Trust in the wisdom of 9-year-olds. That is what I'm also told. Or second graders, or anything below the age of like 16 or so is apparently where the real wisdom and intelligence resides of all things in the world. Yes, and I understand. I understand a junior and a sophomore from Harvard College, I guess, are the people to tell me about a theory that's been around supposedly since what, the 70s, I think it was, something like that. Okay. Anyway, that's my baseline understanding of critical race theory in a slightly sardonic way. Let's see what our speakers have to say.
Afia?
Yes.
Did I pronounce that correctly? We'll start with you.
Yeah, so critical race theory has been around for several decades. It began as a legal and academic framework to examine laws, policies, and institutions to look deeper and think critically about how racism has been woven into these institutions.
Now, if you'll forgive me again for another pause, that is the fatal flaw, as far as I see it, about critical race theory as a quote unquote theory. It assumes racism to be true and present in all things first and foremost. Right? Assuming that racism is in all things, let us examine how racism affects these things. But the question of, is racism actually present, doesn't seem to be part of the discussion. Right? So if you assume racism permeates all levels of society and all levels of people, then you apply critical race theory, because you've already assumed something to be true, whether there's evidence for it or not. And so if you assume something to be true, whether there's evidence for it or not, you're going to find evidence of it if you look that hard with that primary assumption. That, I think, is the fatal flaw in the whole critical race theory idea. But I digress. No, I don't digress. That wasn't a digression. That was actually on point. Never mind. I just wanted to sound smart for a second. I have no idea why anybody would want to do that.
Outside of just individual bias and prejudice. So I think critical race theory is simply a method and a framework to examine how history has created these inequalities and how they've been embedded into our systems.
How history has created these inequalities. Just the march of time itself. Okay.
You know, why is it, for example, that we are taught about our founding fathers, but we don't address the atrocities committed against Native Americans?
I was taught about both in school. Maybe I'm in a weird, unique demographic of students that were taught about these things. In fact, how do you know to bring up the atrocities against Native Americans if we're never taught about the atrocities of Native? Okay.
You know, why is it that slavery and Jim Crow is denounced as un-American and a part of the past?
Well, because A, it is part of the past, and B, set up, it was always an inherent hypocrisy to the words and values of our Constitution. I don't think any rational person would say otherwise. Slavery and discriminatory laws and everything else stood in stark contrast and conflict with the principles and values laid out in our laws from the get-go. And that is a hypocrisy that cannot be denied, has not been denied, and the laws and such and revisions that have happened since then are confessions of that hypocrisy. So I'm not quite sure what you're talking about.
When they inform our present and the makeup of America today.
Yes, they inform our present as a cautionary tale of what can happen when you allow discrimination and prejudice to find their way into our laws. Okay.
Where people of color are still subjected to brutality.
People of color are still subjected to brutality. White people are never subjected to brutality. People of color are subjected to the same levels of brutality, both legal and martial, today as they were back in, say, the 1950s. Does the term proportionality mean anything? Again, I guess we are hearing from a sophomore.
So I think today critical race theory has become a hot button issue.
You think? And why is that, do you think?
Across the United States, despite being around for many, many decades.
Yeah, it was around for many, many decades, but it wasn't put into practice to start turning people into victims and or villains inherently as a matter of educational curricula in K through 12 schools. So you want to bring that up?
And more than 20 states have introduced legislation to ban lessons on racism and other.
No, not lessons in racism. Okay, you're all no. Teaching kids to be racist and to assess one another on the basis of race is not the same as teaching about racism.
Concepts that are deemed too divisive to talk about. So I think it's become a political weapon, misconstrued as a political weapon.
Oh, you're right. It is a political weapon. It hasn't been misconstrued as a political weapon. It is a political weapon, a sociological weapon as well.
And that's why it's under such fierce backlash and debate today.
Great, great. Abigail, do you have any insight on why you think they're starting to ban it across the country?
Oh, that's her having no
because
sound.
there's been just a huge surge in talks.
I'm gonna back up a little bit. That was her sound cutting out, not anything I did. So obviously we're not going to hear everything she had to say, but I started talking over her. Apologies.
Because there's been just a huge surge in talks about diversity, equity, and inclusion writ large. And so what we saw within the Trump administration, namely, was the passing of his executive order that pretty much looked to place a blanket ban on talks including race, gender, etc.
Okay, and I'm being completely sincere here. I don't remember an executive order banning talking about race, gender, etc. What?
And of course, critical race theory was swept under that. And I think to that point,
wait. Okay, maybe I'm forgetting. It's been a busy year or so or something. Okay, Trump executive order race. Okay, executive order on combating race and sex stereotyping. Banning diversity. Okay. Sorry, and I'm honestly trying to refresh my memory here. Okay. Critical race theory and Trump's war unexplained. Trump has attacked diversity training, critical race theory, the 1619 Project, anything that reckons with America's racist past. Trump issued an executive order banning federal contractors from conducting racial sensitivity training, emphasizing his desire to stop, quote, efforts to indoctrinate government employees with divisive and harmful sex and race-based ideologies. Okay, that's what that was. Banning federal contractors. Right. Okay. Just wanted to refresh myself. Again, I'm not being, like, duh, I don't know what I'm talking about. I didn't remember this bit. I remember that Trump had some exception to the whole idea. I didn't recall there was an executive order, but it affected federal contractors because that's really all he had the power to do. Okay. Backing up a little bit because I did cut her off.
Talks including race, gender, etc. And of course, critical race theory was swept under that. And I think to that point, I think it's really important to realize that sort of in the context of DE&I and CRT, while DE&I can involve discussions of race, sexuality, gender, religion, culture, etc., critical race theory is a really important node of that conversation, which is why it is super imperative in our dialogue to continue to keep CRT, at the forefront to fight back against anti-CRT legislation.
That was very fastly laid out. Okay, so yeah, DEI can involve race, gender, orientation. It's almost exclusively involving those things. It's difficult to have any discussion about modern DEI practice, theory, consulting, etc., without those things. So, it is made up of those subjects and the quotas and quotients thereof. But we have to keep CRT at the forefront. Okay, why?
As Afia had mentioned, has become there has been legislation introduced in more than 20 states that is looking to ban CRT discussions in classrooms and otherwise.
Yeah, and as we know, CRT isn't actually used in classrooms. So, what is the problem? This, as I mentioned earlier, this is the inherent contradiction to some of the outrage. We're told over and over again that CRT is not taught in schools. I've done a couple of TEDx talks where we have administrators from schools and teachers saying that very thing. and yet somebody says, I want to ban CRT in schools, it's sort of like saying there are no we do not bring tigers into the classroom in the first place. I'm banning tigers from the classroom. Okay. Like what would be the problem? What resistance would there be to that?
All right. So what is the intention behind CRT, and how does implementing CRT fit in with a broader discussion surrounding diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Yeah, so an interpretation, sorry, go ahead. So an interpretation that I really like to point to is that of Kimberly Crenshaw's, where
Kimberly Crenshaw, oh boy, tell me all about intersectionality.
She mentions that CRT is not a noun, but rather a verb.
CRT is not a noun, but rather a verb.
In the sense that, something that is introduced into conversation and should be engaged with in a really meaningful way. And essentially what CRT hopes to bring into this conversation is to acknowledge that the inequities and inequalities that Black and Brown persons face in years today is very much a product and a function of past inequalities that we've seen, for example, on the topic of structural and systemic racism.
Okay, 1 second over here. Thank you, Mr. Tickle Trunk. Please donate to my Tigers in Every Class fund. Yeah. It's like I have this rock. It keeps tigers away. Huh? It's just a rock. But you don't see tigers around, do you? Like, okay, so CRT is meant to acknowledge that Black and Brown people today are still suffering from the inequities of the past. And for some reason, maybe we'll be told in a second, the famous image, for those of you listening at home, of the 3 people standing behind a fence looking at a baseball game, as we see over and over and over again, which is to say, this is the difference between equality and equity, or at least that's generally how it's used. So yeah, equality of opportunity versus equality of outcome. Why they're showing this up here at this point in the discussion, I can't possibly say. Maybe we'll find out.
I mean, this is, of course, just a historical fact, right? Because we've seen the United States engage in very blatant cases of racism, xenophobia, white supremacy. I mean, let's talk about 400 years of slavery, Japanese internment camps during World War II, Chinese Exclusion Act.
Yeah, and all of these things have been acknowledged in one way, shape, or form. Laws have been changed. Whatever apologies can be made by the government have been for these things over the years. We don't do those things anymore. Well, I mean, I guess I say, depending on who you talk to today, we may or may not want to do some of these things because internment camps for those that choose their own medical outcomes has been a hot topic lately. But yeah, the country is not clean. No country is clean. What does this have? Okay. I guess my fundamental question is, what is the difference between teaching history and critical race theory? Right? If you're just talking about acknowledging and educating on the misdeeds and atrocities of the country's past, which I had in spades when I was a kid, but okay, why is that not enough? What does critical race theory add to that of benefit?
Anti-miscegenation statutes, and we can go on and on and on.
And you can, and those are all historical facts, and people have acknowledged them, and laws have changed, and society has changed. Gay marriage is legal now. Pot is legal in a bunch of places. Honestly, when I was a kid, in the 90s, back when Don't Ask, Don't Tell came up, and I was just, as a kid, starting to become aware of the world and socio-political things because, my attentions had been more on cartoons and toys up to a certain point. I started thinking, gosh, that sounds wrong given what we've supposedly done in the laws since the civil rights movement. Why are we having a don't ask, don't tell when I thought the whole idea behind the civil rights movement was it's irrelevant. It shouldn't be a factor, right? I had that thought when I was a kid. But at the same time, I thought, wow, if we are as far from the civil rights movement as we were at that point, back in the 90s, some 40 some odd years after the fact, I thought, well, this is never going to change in my lifetime. But what do you know? Within about 10, 12 years from that point, everything changed very quickly. And it was really heartening to see that this country could turn on a dime in relative terms. I mean, you think about how long it took for certain laws to evolve in this country at a glacial pace in a relatively short amount of time. Everything changed. Why that isn't looked at as a mark in our collective societal favor that we can evolve, we can change, we can improve not only how we see each other, but treat each other under the law and societally, I don't know. But apparently we can't acknowledge any successes. We always have to dwell on the worst parts of our history forever, as though they happened yesterday.
And just acknowledging that these laws, these statutes, these systems are not only in place, but they're government sanctioned, I think is so important to.
Yes, they were in place and they were government sanctioned and they are no longer. Can you acknowledge that part?
Understanding, the present day failures that we see in our systems when it comes to treating those who are not of the ethnic or racial majority, that is Black and brown persons, with the same equality.
Okay, what equality do you lack under law? I'll wait. What equalities do you lack, you, the individual speaking, under law? I'll wait.
And so I think that really is, how CRT enters the conversation, just painting a more holistic picture of the inequalities that we see present day.
A more holistic picture of the, did you say equalities or inequalities we see in the present day? A one-size-fits-all narrative. That's because that's how the world works. Thank you again, Mr. Tickletron. Critical theory is an actual low-grade tool useful for finding problems in academia with corporations. It is not a diagnostic tool and not a solution. Yeah, critical theory, critical thinking. Let's just talk about that concept for a second. Just the practice of critical thinking, stopping for a second and taking yourself away from a situation and being pragmatic in analyzing what's going on, right? Coming at a situation saying, okay, I have to allow for room that I could be wrong. So let me take a step back and try to look at this pragmatically, try to look at this objectively. Critical thinking is not bad, but critical race theory assumes racism full stop. And then everything else derives from that. And again, if you assume that witches are in the village, then anything that goes wrong, you can then attribute to witches in the village. So anyway, okay, so where were we again?
As well as bring to the forefront how past wrongs can manifest and perpetuate their time into present inequities.
Okay, give me an example of a past wrong that informs present inequities. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but you keep talking about these things, but you provided no examples. So I'm always looking for examples.
And I understand that, we all have a tendency to interpret history differently. And so, and CRT is also kind of falling up under that same understanding that everyone has their different, concept of what it means. And so why do y'all think it means different things to different people?
Because it keeps being applied in different ways. I mean, just listen to your speakers. They haven't even defined it yet. Right? They haven't even defined it. They haven't given any active examples to show how it applies, what it is used for, what it discovers. I mean, if it is a tool, an analytical tool, well, show me an example where things were thought of as X, and then critical race theory was applied, and now we know it is Y. You have to give me a success story of its application, or else it's really difficult for me to just sort of abstractly think about what it is or how it works.
Afia, we can go ahead and start with you on that
one. And her camera's frozen or something. Boy, this broadcast had some technical issues, huh? Let's see. While I have a pause here, I'm going to pin up the comment. I get those so confused these days. They're all the same thing. From Keeverdam, showing his kitten and Angry Illinoisians GoFundMe's. If you guys have a chance, take a look at those pinned at the top of the chat box. Both his kitten and Angry Illinoisian, longtime viewers and supporters of my channel and several others in the Lords of the Night family, are both hitting some difficult times. And if you have an opportunity to take a look at their GoFundMe's, and if you have a couple of bucks available, please consider throwing them their way. Okay, so technical difficulty.
I think she may be frozen for a moment. Abigail, can you pick that up for us?
Yes, of course. So I think a lot of the resistance and pushback that we've seen with CRT, whether that be in legislation or otherwise, is really, I think, like a fundamental lack of understanding of what exactly critical race theory means.
Okay, well then, by all means, educate me. What does critical race theory really mean?
And what is it? It is attempting to sort of play into the conversation. And so what? I think, so there's this writing that...
Okay, again, all this visual stuff is stuff that they put on here. I didn't do this. It's blocking the view of everything. For those of you at home, there is now I guess I'll call it a chart, because it has a double-ended arrow going through these 4 boxes: diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. Diversity of people perspectives, equity in policy, practice, and position, inclusion via power, voice, and organizational culture, and justice with equal rights and equitable opportunities. Right. Equitable opportunities, but you wanted equity in position.
Ibram X. Kendi.
Oh, sorry. She talked about Ibram X. Kendi. I've done a video on him before.
Means, and what is it? It is attempting to sort of play into the conversation. And so I think, so there's this writing that Ibram X. Kendi talked about, when we have something as complex as a theory, as critical race theory, sometimes a lot can be muddied, a lot can be misunderstood.
Then define it. Or if you're admitting it's complex, then either it means something specific or it doesn't mean anything specific. And if it doesn't mean anything specific, then it has no definition. So why don't you define it? I mean, I don't understand why we have a junior and a sophomore at Harvard here speaking as though they are experts on the subject. But if they are here as experts on the subject, define it. Give me the 30-second elevator pitch on critical race theory, because most things can be, hell, the Big Bang can be whittled down to a 30-second elevator pitch explanation in the broad strokes. So define it.
Sometimes a lot can be muddied, a lot can be misunderstood across parties with political differences. And so I think at a very baseline,
yes,
a lot of the pushback is because of a misunderstanding. Yes. But even more than that, I think it's just become very advantageous to kind of broaden the scope of what exactly critical race theory is, or maybe tamper with what critical race theory is. For example, oftentimes you'll hear the opposition say that critical race theory is trying to institute racism within schools or teach racism.
Well, does critical race theory promote the idea of racial identitarianism? I mean, does it or does it not? Does it classify white people as being the carriers of the burdens of the evils of the past done by dead white people, or doesn't it? Does it classify anyone who isn't white as inherently a victim of the system, and anybody who is white a beneficiary of the system? Does it or does it not?
That is not the case, right? Like, no one is trying to kind of pin a certain group of people or alienate them.
Does critical race theory promote the idea of racial identitarianism in life outcomes and societal benefits? Yes or no?
Antagonize them in any way. I think just understanding that in the United States there has been like a racial majority that has held power and has put into place things like you mentioned prior, slavery, Jim Crow laws, etc., and how that continues to impact us in the present day is just an important reckoning that
those laws no longer exist. So, does critical race theory push forward the idea that depending on your race, you are at a particular position in society or not? That you are at a particular level of victimhood or not? That one should look upon another person and upon recognizing their race, already believe they have some understanding of that person's life situation or not? Tell me.
we have to continue engaging with. And then I think to that point, as we see with anti-CRT legislation, if, CRT is trying to be legislated against, I think, in the words of Victor Ray, making laws outlawing CRT kind of confirms that the point of racism is embedded in these laws. So I think that when I first read that, that was incredibly enlightening.
So if you disagree with a theory that racism is everywhere, that confirms that racism is everywhere. Wow, it's almost like CRT is infallible. Golly, what do you do with an infallible theory?
Afia, you want to go ahead and jump in?
Yeah, so I think what Abigail mentioned is really important. I think the ban of, talking about history is...
It is not a ban on talking about history. All right, you've already failed before you've started. There is no ban on talking about history. There is a concern that history is being used as a Trojan horse to introduce racial blame and racial victimhood upon kids in classrooms. That kids who are white have to feel bad that they are white because white people did bad things in America's past. And that kids who are not white need to feel victimized and be suspicious of white people today because of things in the past that white people did that were bad to people who are not white. That is what is the concern, not the teaching of history. So you're already wrong before you've begun.
Completely ridiculous. I think the United States has had, as Abigail mentioned, blatant cases of racism and xenophobia, and it's deeply embedded in our history.
Yes, and it is not being cured or helped with critical race theory, is it?
And to look at these anti-CRT bills, that it's not so much an attack on CRT, it's more of an attack on talking about racism.
No, it is not. If it was a concern about talking about racism, why have there been no do not talk about racism laws prior to this? Tell me, where are the do not talk about racism laws? Before CRT became the soup du jour, why are there no do not talk about racism laws? From 2000, let's just say in the most modern era, okay? From 2000 to 2018, let's say. We'll go that far back. Where are the do not talk about racism in schools laws? Where are the do not talk about slavery in schools laws? Where are those? Because if CRT is just an attempt to get around the hesitation to talk about slavery or racism, well, then you can tell us about all of the efforts made to outlaw slavery and racism from school curricula prior to this, correct?
All. And that seems to be, CRT has sort of become this umbrella term to talk about anything related to racism.
Yeah, and who did that? Who made that the case? You guys have just been saying it this whole time. What is CRT about? It's about examining, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Also, how it affects the systems of et cetera, et cetera. I can't imagine why it's become an umbrella term when it's used to cover so many things by its proponents.
Or xenophobia. And it's become utilized as a political weapon to sort of just deny any accountability for the past, or have any uncomfortable discussions, or talk about topics that they deem too divisive.
What accountability should a child in class in 2022 hold for the events of ancient history in relation to where they are now? What accountability is to be had? What do you mean by who is to be held accountable for slavery today? Who is to be held accountable for Jim Crow laws today? I would love to know the answer to that question. What accountability is to be gained from teaching CRT in schools?
And that kind of segues us right into our next question. How does America's past history inform CRT and education today? But also kind of talk about how the history is not the same for everyone. Everyone has a different idea of exactly what occurred, and how we have to get to an understanding of everyone's part in our history to really even start dialing the dial forward anyway.
So what? There's only supposed to be one perspective on history? Wait, do you guys promote diversity of thought or not? And, entertaining thoughts does not necessarily mean accepting them. So someone's perspective on history could be 100% wrong, but is it meant to be outlawed that anybody think differently about history, even if for the sake of just argument? What? Thank you, Ms. Tickletrunk again. Notice the definition of CRT changes depending on the target. If someone can't define something in one sentence, they're conning you. That's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about. Even the most complex notions of science, the Big Bang, whether you believe in the Big Bang or not, which is, that's all part of science, is having doubt and checking things. But even the concept of the Big Bang can be explained to somebody in 30 seconds in an elevator, right? There are very few things that, I can't think of anything that doesn't have a broad level explanation that you can't give somebody in a couple of minutes just talking to them. Does it include every detail? Does it explain every mechanic? No. But, I can explain capitalism to somebody in 2 sentences, right? I can explain communism to somebody in 2 sentences. It is not the end all be all of that topic, but it describes it pretty well, right? So if you can't give me a 2-sentence / 30-second explanation of CRT that holds true throughout any discussion of CRT, then it is possible that CRT doesn't really mean anything.
Go ahead, Afil.
Yeah, so I think this is such an important question, and history has so much to tell us.
Yes.
So I think critical race theory is all about looking at how that past has informed the present today.
Okay. And why is CRT needed to do that? What parts of a normal, healthy history class lack that mechanic? I remember in history class, we would look at things like, let's just take the civil rights movement, for example, okay? In basic terms, over the course of a week or something, the teacher would say, here's how the U.S. used to treat Black people under the law during slavery times. Here's how that changed after the Civil War. Here's how things still were not fair after the Civil War. Here's how things were up through the 1950s and 60s. Here's what happened with the civil rights movement, most prominently known, led by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Obviously, there were dozens and dozens and dozens of other people in the civil rights movement as leaders, but he was the most prominent, right? All right. And here's the signing of the Civil Rights Act. Here's what that did. Here's how that changed things. Here's the things that still need to be worked on, or the parts of it that still hadn't been defeated over the course of time. Here's where we are now. What is outside the realm of simply learning about history and the progression of events that requires CRT to tell me how things from the past affect the today? It would be my question.
How did state-sponsored segregation, redlining affect the makeup of our cities and neighborhoods?
Why is CRT necessary for that? What does CRT bring to the discussion that was not or could not already have been there?
How have quotas and Chinese exclusion affected how we view immigrants? And
again, why is CRT necessary? What does CRT bring to the discussion that was not already present or available prior to its existence?
How we view Asian Americans today.
How do we view Asian Americans today? You tell me. I guess you know more than I do. How do we, quote unquote, view Asian Americans today because of the Chinese Exclusion Act? How old is the Chinese Exclusion Act again?
It's all about asking these questions and looking deeper. I think in education, especially in K through 12 schools, it's really important for students to engage critically.
Oh, so critical race theory is and or should be implemented in K through 12 schools, you say? Oh, I thought we were looking at this from the college perspective, the high-minded academic level where CRT is actually used. Okay.
Rather than shying away from topics deemed too controversial or uncomfortable.
I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what to tell our speaker. I was taught about racism and slavery and the civil rights movement and all types of things like that from about third grade forward, I think. It may have been earlier, not too much earlier, I imagine. But, I mean, talk about difficult conversations. My class watched the Challenger explode. I mean, yeah.
History should be confronted so that we can utilize it and act for change. I think there's no power in sanitizing history, only telling one narrative, one dominant narrative. That's
who's sanitizing history? How does CRT prevent the sanitization of history? I don't like sounding like somebody who has to ask the dumbest questions, but you need to provide examples. You guys are both Harvard college students. That when I was growing up, the idea that you were attending Harvard supposedly meant something as far as your educational acumen, your ability to analyze things, your intelligence. Whoa. What is this? No, stop it. You see, I got a new phone. I know. It's still a dumb phone, but it is a new phone because 3G is going away. So I had to get a 4G phone. And as a consequence of that, I had to rebuild my entire alerts noises and things. And so now, and it may have been a mistake, the alert noise for a message hitting my phone is the opening sounds to the TV show The Shield. That's just unnecessary little trivia, but it just intruded on the stream. So there you go. Anyway, what was I saying? Oh yeah, you need to give us some examples of what you're talking about. Just saying that it does these things doesn't make any sense. We need compare and contrast. This is how history was taught and how insufficient it was before CRT And this is what CRT brings and enhances it by. Here is the benefit, right? Do that. You're in Harvard. You're on a panel talking about CRT as, I guess, an expert. Tell me.
It's been told for centuries, continues to exclude people of color and foster environments where students don't feel adequately represented.
Where? How? In what way? Under what laws? Examples. I'm not saying there aren't any. Maybe there are. I don't know. I'm trying to come at this critically. I'm trying to come at this as best as I can objectively. And I am wanting you to provide me information that may or may not show me that my perspective is wrong. That's why I do this every week. I'm not doing this just for entertainment purposes. I want somebody to show me that my perspective on something or my suspicions about something have no merit. So that's why I want you to give me examples. I want you to be very specific. Not just say that something is so, show me that something is so.
And it's really important to confront this history and to use it because it has power.
If we had not confronted the history of racism and discrimination in this country, why is there a Civil Rights Act? Okay. And don't get me wrong, I am not saying the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was a panacea and suddenly all racism was gone and everybody was happy. No. But its very existence is a confession and an acknowledgement of the wrongdoings of the past. So how is the Civil Rights Act of 1964 even in existence if the past has not been confronted in some way, shape, or form? Let's even forget everything that has come after that. Every piece of legislation, every revision, every amendment, every movement. Let's just focus on that one event. If the events of the past were never confronted, were never accounted for, were never acknowledged, how does the Civil Rights Act of 1964 even exist? Riddle me that.
Abigail, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, just emphasizing everything that was just mentioned.
Well, then why speak? If you have nothing to offer than to supplement something someone else already says, then you have nothing new to offer. Give us something new, or just say, I agree with what she said, and end it there. Everything else is hot air, isn't it?
But I think even more than that, just understanding that CRT is really looking to paint this holistic picture.
Holistic. I hear this so often. This holistic. Let's just refresh ourselves. What does holistic mean? Just for our own edification here. Characterized by comprehension of the parts of something as intimately interconnected and explicable only by reference to the whole. Holistic. What is the benefit of CRT being a holistic perspective? You keep using that word. I would love to know why you keep using that word.
Of history, like Afia mentioned.
Can you have a holistic view of history? Is that a wise way to go, given the complexities of history?
And kind of having that in conversation with past histories, whether that be
past histories? Past histories.
That were taught in schools, taught in upper level education, and sort of learn and relearn through that process that is engaging with critical race theory.
You said absolutely nothing. I mean, I'm inclined to listen to that whole piece again. her bit there, because that was an exercise in saying absolutely nothing. Thank you, Kieverdam. I think Tickle Trunk wants her and everyone else to know that the USA has a mixed race president, or had a mixed race president. Yeah, that seems to get forgotten a lot of the time. Like, how did we end up there? I mean, example after example after example that shows that maybe things have changed somewhat since this terrible, terrible past that did exist. Maybe we have evolved. Maybe it's possible for the United States in particular as a society to change over time. You know, what was the phrase, to form a more perfect union? It's because it's an unending quest. We're never going to be perfect, and it's never going to be 100% right. And every time we get it wrong, you can honestly point out how wrong we got it. A lot of countries on the planet, you can't do that. A lot of countries on the planet, you can't take a whole lot of time to criticize the country's past misdeeds without risking something. Now, thank you, Johnny Hellcat. Harvard, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, Harvard. Okay, I did back up. I'm going to let this play without interruption, just for everyone's, I don't know, just for those in the cheap seats. Thank you, Mr. Tickle Trunk. It's all about race. 2 seconds later, we're holistic. Yeah. Okay, here we go.
You want to weigh in?
Yeah, just emphasizing everything that was just mentioned. But I think even more than that, just understanding that CRT is really looking to paint this holistic picture of history, like Afia mentioned, and kind of having that in conversation with past histories, whether that be that we're taught in schools, taught in upper level education, and sort of learn and relearn through that process that is engaging with critical race theory.
You know, and these things are kind of reminiscent of getting to a point where there's no history that's being discussed at all.
What? What is that? What the fuck is that?
No history is being discussed at all? What? Okay, I'm going to need an explanation for that one. I need that one explained to me. Thank you, Mike R. All this stupidity is going to give me a nosebleed. You know, it's kind of like listening to, and we have done it on the Sunday stream many times before, listening to like diversity, equity, and inclusion experts. And if you listen to them long enough, there's nothing there. Like they run out of gas real quick and they have nothing more to say. It's just words. But now, okay, it's getting to the point where history isn't being taught at all. Is that what he said? I want to back up. Okay.
Theory.
You know, and these things are kind of reminiscent of getting to a point where there's no history that's being discussed at all, right? And then you get into points where you start to burn books, or books have become non-important in education. And so
where's the book burning taking place? And I don't mean like some Yahoo up in, you know, nowhere's land burning a book. I'm talking about like government sanctioned, societally pushed book burnings. What are you talking about?
Maybe leaning towards a dark place.
Really classifying people and their value in society and their blame for historical wrongdoings on the basis of their race is a dark place to go? You know what? I agree with you. That would be a very dark place to go to. Maybe we shouldn't be teaching critical race theory in K through 12 schools then, huh?
If things keep going the way that they're going.
So you see the end result of opposition to critical race theory as book burning. That is what you see as the ultimate end result of a opposition to critical race theory, book burning. Got it.
But what are some ways that we can learn more about critical race theory?
Yes.
And how we can engage with CRT in a meaningful way? You know, how can we start having these conversations that, you know, really help people understand that we have to be critical, you know, of the way we've been taught in the past and the information that has been given across?
I have no idea what that's supposed to mean. Who has not been critical about slavery? Because it doesn't exist anymore in this country. If we weren't critical about the sins of the past, would that... Sorry.
Right. I can start us off. So critical race theory is obviously a very complex issue to engage with. So
why don't you simplify it for us very briefly? Oh, Harvard Junior.
For me, what I've found to be really helpful in my understanding and own journey
Yes.
Has been, you know, just reading about it at a definitional level. So for example,
yes, reading about it at a definitional level. Okay. For example,
reading things published by the NAACP or the Brookings Institute have been really helpful. Or also engaging in the debates, whether that be for the pro or anti-CRT side as well. Reading through legislation, really understanding sort of what CRT means.
What does it mean in 2 sentences, please?
And how it has sort of entered the mainstream has also been very important.
Wow, thanks. That was great. Thank you, Mr. Tickle Trunk. Who's book burning? Based on CRT, local New Democratic Party of Canada members burn books here as part of removing quote unquote racist literature. Yeah, that's, well, if you're talking about like banning, I always think back to like when they kept banning Catcher in the Rye or Huckleberry Finn, things like that. You know, I think there was, if I'm not mistaken, there was a push at one point to ban To Kill a Mockingbird. You know, a book who has a central theme of anti-racism and anti-discrimination, and because certain bad words or references were used in it, which were used in the setting and the time period of the story, therefore the book itself needed to go away. You know, something that was a teaching tool after a fact is in and of itself somehow a font of evil. That kind of thing. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, so our Harvard Junior recommended we read stuff from the NAACP, and I think she said, you say the Brookings Institute? I couldn't tell. But didn't actually tell us what it was or how we are to understand it. Okay.
Yes, and I think you know, asking these questions is the first step. Every day, you know, more and more people are beginning to realize how deeply rooted this systemic racism is.
Okay, I have a question. How deeply rooted is it? Give me an example. Here's my question. I don't think that racism is as systemic as you say. So where is the evidence? Just saying it is so, assuming racism is the universal constant, is not a smart place to begin with. First, you have to prove its presence in things, and you haven't done that here. So, yeah, maybe I'm thinking incorrectly. I don't know. I need to be corrected, obviously. Oh boy.
Step. Every day, you know, more and more people are beginning to realize how deeply rooted this systemic racism is. And by beginning to meaningfully engage with history and thinking critically, we can begin to enact change and work towards a more equitable outcomes for everyone. I think really examining these bills and the languages that's used, you know, why is it that racism is deemed too divisive to talk about in schools when it's the living reality for, you know, people of color across the country?
You're not being intellectually honest here. critical race theory opposition is not opposition to talking about racism. Okay. This, and I know I've said this far too many times, and I apologize, but this is part of the reason why I watch these things. This is part of the reason why I engage with these things, is because I want to entertain notions and ideas and perspectives and opinions that I believe at the outset may stand in stark opposition to my own. Because I do not want to assume that my position, my thinking is 100% correct, infallible, forever and ever. I have seen the destruction that causes in both the world and in personal relationships when you operate like that. I want to believe, and I know for a fact, that I am not right on everything. So the fact that our speaker here seems to believe that the opposition to critical race theory is an opposition to quote unquote teaching history or quote unquote acknowledging racism, etc., tells me that she has not critically examined the opposition's perspective. She has not stepped back from the argument and listened to both sides objectively. So our speaker here is not a reliable narrator on this subject. At least not in this instance. In another conversation, in another forum, maybe she's completely and totally clear on it. I don't know. But here, when you whittle down the opposition to something as silly as, we don't want racism taught in schools, we don't want slavery to be talked about in schools, you're not being honest.
So I think really engaging and thinking critically and asking important questions and looking deeper is really important to understanding critical race theory and also utilizing it for change.
And again, you said absolutely nothing. Nothing. Please, I really want this to happen on one of these at some point. I want somebody to say, here was the common thinking on slavery before CRT. Here is the thinking after applying a CRT lens. See how this perspective is more informed, more beneficial, more educational than the common practice. I want somebody to put something that simple and stark forward as an example of the benefits of CRT so that I can take a look at that and I can weigh myself whether or not that argument makes sense. Because 9 times out of 10, all I hear are buzzwords and just sophistry and nothing of substance. So I would love to have that happen. Tell me how this perspective on slavery put through a critical lens is a better one than in the absence of a critical lens. Right? And how did the previous methods of examining the course of history when it comes to slavery, Jim Crow, racism, the Civil Rights Act, etc., how is that deficient? What does CRT do to improve it?
Well, I really enjoyed our time together today. You two young ladies are very dynamic, and I just want to say thank you for joining us today. And any last thoughts that you all want to leave with our audience today? Abigail?
Yes, I think engaging with hard ideas, although it can be difficult, is incredibly important.
You don't say, really? Really? Huh? Okay. How about the hard idea that you could be wrong? Not that you are wrong. I don't know. I can't read your mind. How about confronting the hard idea that you are wrong? That your opinion on CRT, or more specifically, your opinion on the opposition to CRT, could be wrong. Can you entertain that possibility for a moment? And in doing so, evaluate the arguments against it objectively? Because that would be critical thinking.
Especially in our modern day, where oftentimes we're so divisive, so divided. I think being able to listen to opposing points of views engaging in free speech, engaging with others is the only way that we can move forward.
Well, you're already dismissing opponents to CRT as history deniers, right? You're already characterizing opponents to CRT incorrectly and dismissively, and might I say, divisively. So are you helping the situation or aren't you? Are you being honest in engaging in this debate? Or have you already made up your mind and anybody else on the other side of the aisle is 100% wrong?
In a really constructive way for ourselves.
Effie?
Yeah, I think it's always important to have these uncomfortable conversations, even though they might be difficult. But
okay, again, have the uncomfortable conversation with yourself and ask, could I be wrong? And ask that of yourself honestly. Take a step back and actually listen to the concerns of people who are against CRT. And I really love to know what you mean by accountability. How is that to take place in K through 12 schools?
But I think it's really important to engage and sort of go outside our comfort zone. And only then can we work towards a better future.
On that point, I agree. Go outside your comfort zone. Don't sit in your bubble and not allow any other ideas or notions or thoughts to enter in that might conflict or contrast with your own. I agree. That is not a safe place to be. That's why I do this. I have to ask, though, are you practicing what you are preaching?
That's exactly what I would have said. And the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute needs to be that place where we can have those difficult conversations and have that uncomfortable discussion.
You know, oftentimes, and I know this is just, maybe my cynicism. Whenever I hear somebody talk about having uncomfortable conversations, I've over time, and not just reflexively, but over time, I have to take that to mean you listen to what I say and agree with it. Your opposition to what I have to say is not allowed, or your opposition to what I have to say proves the rightness of what I have to say.
All in the name of progress and trying to steer this country forward and our world forward. So thank you all very much. Once again, my name is Charles Woods. I want to say thank you again to John Paul, our Civil Rights Fellow, for setting all of this up, and these two dynamic young ladies to join us from Harvard College. So thank you once again. Have a good day.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you, John Paul, and the two dynamic ladies. Okay, well, obviously, that was just a 15, almost 16-minute deal to try to discuss something as complex as CRT. But there you go. I'll give a couple minutes here for anything you guys want to add, and then we will wrap up. Old Man Enfield, there's no conversation, there's a lecture, and you're on the breach end of it. That is often what, difficult conversations, uncomfortable conversations usually just mean, like you say, a lecture. It's not about having a dialogue. It's about listening to how you're wrong and I'm right. Deco, the malls are the only good thing about Birmingham these days. I've never been to Alabama. The most southern point I've been to for any long period of time has been Louisiana and New Orleans. That's about it. Anything outside of that maybe was a stopover on a plane trip or something. Let's see. Data Wasteland. G Scribbles, don't you see? Just asking for proof from your white privileged supremacist perspective is in itself institutionally racist. I know, right? I know. It's terrible. Bridget, do you believe that the banning of books by CRT crowd could be used to erase our basis of how bad the past was and how we changed and became better? That way they could say it's still bad. Books by CRT crowd could be used to. So the removal of books from a curriculum, it all depends on what the argument is. Like somebody saying, oh, you can't read Huckleberry Finn because they use the N-word. I don't think that that's justifiable. And most of this, I did a one of my earliest curriculum of fear videos. It might have been the first or second one. I can't remember. One of the teachers talking was giving this sob story, this personal sob story, and she actually described herself as crying white girl tears because she had to teach To Kill a Mockingbird in class, and she wasn't sure how to do it because she was so scared of teaching this book because of the words used in it and such. And she had no idea how she was going to teach this book. And I thought, if you were an adult, you might say something to the class like, class, we're going to read To Kill a Mockingbird. This book takes place in this particular era with these particular things going on. As we proceed, we may hear or read words or learn about concepts that seem out of place, antiquated, or even offensive in our day to day. As we go forward, I will do my best to give you the context of what's going on and why it is as we go through the book. I'll be an adult about it. In those situations, I don't think there's a problem with keeping a book in, and anybody banning a book because it has a bad word in it, seems a bit out of place. Now, some of the subject matter in some of these CRT books, there's a couple out there that have explicit depictions of sexual activity. Yeah, no, not for children. You wouldn't let a Playboy magazine sit around in a children's classroom, right? So why would you have that there? It really depends on the context of removing a book from a school. Things that have bad words, for the most part, I'd say no. That shouldn't be done. But again, it depends on the book, depends on the motivation behind it. I can't say, because some things probably shouldn't be in the realm of small children. There are young adult novels. That's why ratings on movies and so on. But could CRT proponents use the removal of CRT books to say, aha, see, racism still exists. They're banning books, etc. They could use that, sure. Would they be justified in doing so? Well, I guess that's the longer conversation. I don't know. Let's see. Bridget, I'm talking about CRT activists banning books. Oh, well, if CRT activists are trying to ban books, again, it would depend on the context. I mean, just because somebody's for CRT and they say this book isn't appropriate for K through 12 students, they might be right. Depends on the book. It's one of those things where it's like, well, Donald Trump says the sky is blue. Well, obviously he can't be right because he's Donald Trump. I don't know. It all depends on the book. It all depends on the justification for it. It's a case-by-case basis. Banning a book from school as a concept all by itself is an ambiguous act, in my mind, without some more information. So sorry for the convoluted answer, but in the absence of a specific example, I couldn't tell you. Dylan Farnham, just wait till they start reading 50 Shades of Grey and sex ed. Well, I wouldn't be surprised if that's been used in high schools or something, at least as like a, you want to talk about a fluke success story, taking Twilight fanfic, what was effectively Twilight fanfic, changing the names and things, and that turning into the bestseller that it was. I got to tell you, I give E.L. James a whole lot of credit for just, talk about hitting on the pulse of the nation at the right time. Jeez. Let's see. Who else on here? Scanner Daffley, I feel bad for these ladies. They are going to be caught in self-inflicted pain for a long time. I don't know. I think they both have, in the current zeitgeist, careers in DEI and so on, depending on what they're aiming for. But I don't know. I got to wonder because, again, you're bringing forth college students, right? We're looking at what, like 18, 19, 20-year-olds? Yeah, they haven't lived in the real world yet. They haven't lived beyond college or had to deal with things outside of the sort of hug box that I think Harvard has become in the last several years. So, yeah, that's why I was kind of surprised they'd have on speakers who haven't even completed their education yet and are talking about something that's so complex, as they said, do they really have a handle on it yet? Could they? Let's see. Andrew Joyner, a radical solution might be just teaching history. Just a thought. Yeah, teaching history and just showing the progression of events. I mean, a lot can be learned just by looking at how things proceeded of their own accord. A lot of history doesn't require a whole lot of commentary, right? There are some things that require interpretation or analysis after the fact, like why did the U.S. lose Vietnam, right? A lot of theories, a lot of pieces, a lot of moving parts there. But you can look at like, okay, just the high level facts. U.S. moved into Vietnam. U.S. ran away from Vietnam. This is how soldiers were treated when they came home. This is how soldiers and veterans' rights altered. I mean, just watching what people did, cause and effect throughout history, just the basic documented facts of the progression of events can tell you a lot without having to do a whole lot of extra analysis. And the spaces in between of this happened and then this happened. And you could just think to yourself, well, how did we get from point A to point B? What could have caused that? The curiosity of the spaces in between events. Yeah, anyway. Frank Hubbard IV. I've only dabbled in BDSM, and that movie was so far off from what I've read. Was it bad to you? Very briefly, 50 Shades of Grey, the book and the movie, depict probably not necessarily but certainly a over-the-top representation of an unhealthy BDSM relationship or power exchange relationship. That is not a healthy way to proceed. Either, I mean, take away all of the kinky stuff. The power dynamics in that relationship outside of the leather and the chains, no one would say that that's a healthy relationship. And consequently carried over into the bedroom where you're dealing with someone's physical and mental safety. No, that is not a guidebook. And I during the course of the time that book was coming out and prominent and everything, I was cringing, as I'm sure a lot of people were, that people might look at this as a guidebook. It just, Anyway, that's as much as I can say on that. X4390247. Ooh, I know the answer. CRT is socialism and it's under attack for the same reason. Sure. I don't know. When we start getting into economic systems and things, I sort of like, my brain just says nope, because I don't know enough to say. But yeah, I mean, anything that tries to tell you that there is an assumption to be made about someone's character or value or place in the world on the basis of their skin color, to carry over the sins of the distant past and place them upon the shoulders of people living now who had nothing to do with them, or to carry over the victimhood of things that never happened to you and walk around as though somehow you're continuing to be oppressed by things that happened hundreds of years ago and by people that exist today, etc. Doesn't sound healthy, does it? Doesn't really sound healthy. And let's see, anything else from anybody else? Let's see, Johnny Hellcat. My friend would have voted for banning books because he didn't want to read it. LOL. Yeah, there's that too. It's like, hey kids, there's this terrible thing going on, and if you wanted to, you could go out and protest and get a day off of class. Yeah, we're gonna go protest. Who wants to do schoolwork, right? Anyway, everyone, there you go. I honestly, I didn't know that the speakers were going to be still in school college students. I thought that we were going to have speakers that, had some expertise or some academic credentials to their names on the subject. So I was kind of disappointed in that sense, but there you go. That is what the current thinking and opinion and rhetoric is from the next generation on the subject. And so let me know your thoughts in the comments if you didn't have an opportunity to say so in the chat here, or I didn't get to your chat comment this time around. If you'd like to hear more from me, well, I have a whole channel full of stuff like this and other things. I've got true crime videos now, at least 3 of them. I've got TEDx's. If you guys haven't seen my TED Excellence series, well, you can find me here next Thursday at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern for the next installment of TED Excellence, where I'll take a look at some off-brand TED Talk for our education and entertainment. I call it edutainment. I made that up all by myself, don't you know? Everyone, thank you so much for joining me today on this beautiful Sunday morning. Moderators, thank you for keeping an eye on things. Even though everyone here is so well behaved, you have very little to do unless they're a Russian bot. Everyone who donated, thank you. Thank you so much for your generosity. I really do appreciate it. Be sure to take a look again at the GoFundMe links at the top of the chat window for His Kitten and Angry Illinoisian. Your generosity can be very welcome there as well. And with that, everyone, I hope you all have a good rest of your Sunday. Hope you have a good weekend overall and a good week ahead of you. Hope you're all safe and well. If you're not well, please get well soon, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.